Hi, Colin Marshall here. You know about Notebook on Cities and Culture, but do you know about Los Angeles, the city and cinema? For the past few months, I've been creating video essays about the variety of Los Angeles as revealed in the films shot and set there, like Blade Runner, Her, Drive, Strange Days, and The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. You can find out more about them and watch all of them at colinmarshall.org. On Sunday, January 25th, 2015, I'm coming to Portland, Oregon's Hollywood Theater to give a screening and live talk called Portland and Los Angeles, the Cities in Cinema. I'll show and discuss never-before-seen Los Angeles video essays there, but it'll also be the world premiere of Portland, the City in Cinema, my long-form video essay on the roles the City of Roses has played in films like Zero Effect, Old Joy, Cold Weather, and My Own Private Idaho. Also, we'll definitely all drink a lot of beers. For details, visit colinmarshall.org. And to buy your tickets, visit hollywoodtheater.org. Thanks. Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. From your experience, how much do Koreans know about the Isle of Man?
Well, actually, not a great deal at all. I think there's only one or two aspects of the Isle of Man that people know about. Some people have heard of the TT races, these sort of famous motorcycle, very deadly motorcycle races that they have every year. And some people know the Isle of Man as an offshore tax haven. You know, Obama a couple of years ago was sort of cracking down on the offshore tax havens. So I think that's the Isle of Man's two main claims to fame here in Seoul. Yeah.
Now, why do I ask about the Isle of Man? Because today on Notebook on Cities and Culture, I'm speaking with a fellow who came, I guess you could say, the last place he lived was the Isle of Man. It was the Isle of Man to Korea. His name is Barry Welsh. He is many things. He is the leader of the 10 Magazine Book Club. He is the host of the host or co-host of the Seoul Film Society. What's your title?
Co-host of Seoul Film Society.
Co-host of Seoul Film Society. He is the host of Barry's Book Club on EBS, and he's also a teacher here. So a very full plate and a very culturally engaged one as well. And how long did it take you to get involved in all these things since coming here?
Well, I guess I've been here for just under 4 years now, coming up on 4 years. And the book club's been going for almost 3.5 years, so that was my first sort of extracurricular kind of activity. And at first I started very, very small. It was just a regular book club, you know, just 5 or 6 people meeting and choosing a book and reading the same book and talking about it.
What were the early books?
The early books were generally themed around something that I thought would be interesting to the audience. So 1 month we sort of discussed North Korea books. 1 month we talked about teacher biographies, so you know, like Frank McCourt and things like that. But then very quickly I wanted to build the book club into something a little bit more, and so I guess it's sort of kind of evolved into a series of author events, of writer events. And what I do now is I invite writers to come and basically be interviewed on stage. You know, they're interviewed on stage by a moderator, and then there's a chance for the audience to ask questions. Yeah.
So when did this start growing so big? I mean, it was just a book club as we think of book clubs as being at first, and now it's a big event every time. When did the change happen?
Well, at first, the first guest that I had was a writer called Chris Lee, who wrote this very highly acclaimed collection of short stories called Drifting House. And she was the first guest, and I asked her to come because I knew her personally a little bit. We were sort of Facebook friends, and then when she came, I sort of had the idea. I realised what the book club could become, what it could be, and then a couple of months later, I asked a young North Korean man called Shin Dong-hyuk, who was the subject of a biography called Escape from Camp 14. And when I started advertising that event, the response was incredible. Like, so many people wanted to come to the event, so I had to book a different venue and find a larger space. And when he came, then that's when it really crystallized in my mind exactly what the book club could be. And so from that point, you know, it started growing more and more. And in the past year, I've had some like really famous Korean writers have been. So Shin Kyung-suk came like a couple months ago. She wrote Please Look After Mom, and I mean the turnout was incredible, you know. And you know, Lee Chang-rae came a month or two ago as well, and but even the book club's got to the point now where, you know, I can book anybody and the response is good. I mean, people just kind of follow the book club now, so people seem to, they're interested in whoever the guest is. So
the momentum is there, then, in other words.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
These authors, Chris Lee, the listeners to this show will hear her soon on the very next episode, I believe. And it's fascinating with her book, reading it. It's short stories. Some of them even take place in America, but I feel like, you know, I'd been familiar with Koreans and Korean culture for a while, for years, but I think something about her writing gave me a lot more insight in a way that I can't put into words exactly. It's something I'll struggle to explain to her when I'm interviewing to her, but what experiences have you had understanding Korean culture more through these writers, through their books?
Oh, well, like you say, the Chris Lee book is really fascinating, a very interesting book, and she has, you know, stories, like you say, set, you know, in America, and stories set here in South Korea, and she's also got some stories set in North Korea there. But I think one of the things about Chris's book is, in some regards, it's very Korean in a sense, right? It has this idea of Han, this idea of sort of sadness, this sort of deep Korean sadness, and you definitely get a sense of that in Drifting House, in those short stories. But I think generally, reading, you know, I like literature. I've always been into books. I studied literature as an undergraduate, and just as a way of understanding the world, that's just something that interests me, okay? So obviously you move to a different country and you want to try and engage with the culture that's there just for your own interest and just to, you know, enrich your experience of being here, right? So one of the most interesting things was, you know, reading Korean literature, and the first Korean book in translation I read was actually Kim Young-ha's I Have the Right to Destroy Myself. And, you know, very, very fascinating book, very sort of modern. Of the Korean writers, he's called one of the most sort of modern, you know, these modern young Korean writers. But that was just such a fascinating book. It mentions lots of places in Seoul, you know, places that you can actually go, like Insadong, and, you know, having these areas sort of described in fiction, you know, it adds another layer to those places, right? So, you know, it adds a sort of another level to your experience. Like, it was just kind of intoxicating, right? After I read that book, I could go to Insadong, you know, and sort of, kind of vicariously kind of go through the steps that the people in the book, you know.
You can do that. I mean, the place has changed a bit since then, but you can. But did you go in one of those bullet taxis? That's the question.
Oh, no, I didn't do that, actually. I didn't do
they're really, really, really fast. Like, he's not even exaggerating in the book. Yeah. They're really that fast. I mean, that sounds like a really Korean invention to me, a taxi that goes in the middle of the night as fast as possible down the highway.
Right. Well, that's I'm sure lots of your other guests will tell you as well, the sort of the high-pressure pace of Korean life. This bally culture, they call it. So working all the time and studying all the time. You know, everybody here, especially in Seoul, seems to be busy. Everybody, you know, outside of their job, they have all sorts of kind of projects or hobbies, and everybody's learning another language or an instrument or, you know, doing something, you know. So, and I think the work culture here is very, you know, very pressurized. I know from lots of my Korean friends, you know, they have to work, you know, very late and at the weekend. So I definitely think that, you know, you don't have any time to waste, right?
So like that on the Isle of Man?
No, the pace of life is definitely different on the Isle of Man. Yeah, definitely very different. Yeah.
Was going there like going to a foreign land for you as well, in the same way that not to the same degree, but in the same way that going to Korea was?
Not really. The Isle of Man has its quirks. You know, I'm from Scotland originally, and I lived in England for a long time, and I lived in Ireland for a little while. So the Isle of Man's it's just part of the British Isles. You know, it has its own little idiosyncrasies and unusual little, you know, factors, but you know, it's very not too different from England.
But I would imagine, having lived in Scotland, Ireland, England, and the Isle of Man, you have a grasp on the sort of way regional differences work, because here they're very important. Is it the same thing? I mean, foreigners often come, especially Americans, come to Korea and don't quite understand how different the regions of Korea are from each other, or how the people how the people from one province regard the others. I would imagine you have more of an insight or more used to that kind of thing, given that you've lived all over the UK in that way.
Well, yeah, actually, I remember when I moved to England from Scotland for the first time, that was when I really noticed there was a difference between, Scotland and England. Even in the way people reacted to my accent,
I jumped out at you.
Well, I think people did respond to you. You were marked as different, right? You were marked as other, right? I wasn't English. I was Scottish, right? And I think I subconsciously I started softening my accent or something. And when I go back home, people would tell me I sounded English, and obviously, whenever I was in England, people were, "Oh wow, you sound so Scottish."
Can't win.
I know, that's right. But it was like I'm sure I had one conversation with my aunt once, and she said, "You sound so English," and I felt like I was betraying my culture. I'd betrayed my Scottish heritage. But
it happens here too when someone from Busan comes to Seoul.
Yeah.
They can't speak like a Busan Saram. They have to speak like a Seoul Saram. And if they go back home, suddenly they're this savvy Seoulite who's getting a hard time for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. I have some students from Busan, and I've heard that kind of thing before. I think it's the same as well for students from Jeju. You have Jeju dialect, and I think people do notice those differences. I guess in some respects they are quite important, right? But actually, it's fun, like moving around the British Isles, there's a sort of a sort of feeling of brotherhood between, Scottish and Irish people. So, being a Scottish person in Ireland was really kind of fun, that people would respond to you, entirely different from in England,
How do they regard the Scottish in Ireland?
Oh, well, there's this, historically there is this sort of bond, right? But I don't know if it's maybe, Irish people have a sort of a reputation for being very friendly and gregarious anyway, but I did feel, very warmly embraced as a young Scottish person living in Ireland, People were sort of excited to speak to you,
I've heard Koreans described as the Irish of Asia for decades. Is it true? Do you think it's true?
I'm not sure. Well, I think I first read that in Michael Breen's book, right, The Koreans, which I think is about a decade old now, maybe a little longer.
He's doing a new edition, but the last one is 2004.
Ah, okay. But yeah, I've heard that before, and I think, well, I suppose you could point to maybe the drinking culture, this sort of happy drinking culture where everybody likes to drink together, and I guess you could also point to just that idea of jong, that idea of jong, this sort of general camaraderie and friendship and warmth. So
the invisible hug, Daniel Tudor calls it.
That's right. But I think maybe there's that similar sort of emotional resonance, that sort of camaraderie and group friendship. Maybe you get in Ireland as well. I've actually heard a couple of times people say that Koreans are like Italians.
Yeah, I've also heard Italians of Asia, so it's sort of like, then how much do the Irish and Italians have in common,
No, I'm not sure there's that much crossover, but I think the comparison with Italians is to do with the overflowing of emotion. You hear,
and of food.
Right, yeah, and the love of food as well. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But yeah, I'm not sure how much depth there is in the Irish, comparison. Yeah.
Did you always have your sights on moving to a foreign land? Was it always in your mind as a possibility if the right stars aligned?
No, not really. In my 20s, I was really trying to, I wanted to get to do my PhD. I did my undergraduate, and then I had some student debts, so I had to pay some student debts, and then I went back and I did my master's degree, and so I had some more student debts after that, and I actually ended up in the Isle of Man just by accident, working in a career that I had no real ambition to be in. I was an investment dealer.
Sounds impressive when you tell people.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a technical job, and I qualified, I did some exams and all the rest of it, but again, it was just an accident to start that career. But at the time, I'd never really earned, decent money before, so just having a nice income for a while, it was really, it was a nice experience, and but I ended up staying in that job for longer. I was there for a few years, and when the financial crash happened in 2008, my sort of earning potential kind of declined, and I was getting a little bit older. I kind of turned 30 around about that time, and I was conscious of the fact that I hadn't travelled outside the British Isles, and I sort of figured I was a little bit too old for backpacking. The backpacking experience wasn't something I was after, but with my degree, my master's degree, I thought I could try teaching. So
how did the option of Korea emerge?
Well, I didn't know a great deal about Korea. I knew the same things that everybody else does. North Korea is the main thing that Korea's in the news for in Britain. So, I mean, that's what I knew about. But no, I just researched. So I researched China and Japan and India and just various places. And I just heard about South Korea as a possible destination. And at the time, they had this program called the EPIC program, which was, placing teachers in high schools.
Usually in pretty remote areas, right?
Well, no, there's a few in Seoul. That's actually quite big in Seoul as well. And, I'm a city person now. I grew up in the countryside, but I'm definitely more of a city person. So
make you a city person sometimes.
That's right. And so, yeah, I applied for the EPIC program and came here. But initially I was only going to stay here for, a year. I was still considering going back to Edinburgh or London and continuing as an investment dealer. I was fed up living in the Isle of Man, but, there's not much culture in the Isle of Man, and after a few years, if you're not planning on settling down there, there's just not that much to engage you, especially if you're not into, racing or motorsports, right? Yeah.
Not just once a year, right?
Yeah, they have things all year. They have all sorts of stuff going on. There's like a local scene, but yeah, so I was only going to stay here for a year, so I think it's a testament to just having enjoyable a place Seoul is to live that I'm still here, 4 years later, and it looks like I'm going to be here for, well, I don't know, for good, possibly, I don't know.
Did you come straight to Seoul then when you were teaching?
Yeah, I came straight to Seoul, and I'd lived in Edinburgh and I'd lived in London for a while, but still coming to Seoul was really quite a mind-blowing experience at first. I had this nice little apartment. I was kind of out in the sticks in Seoul, right? I was sort of away from the main areas.
Let's go on a ways, Seoul.
Yeah. And really fantastic experience. Just the first couple of weeks, the first couple of months when you're living in a new country, the most mundane experience is a rich encounter. You're going to the local supermarket or just getting lost in my little neighborhood that I lived in. Was just really fantastic, and for the first few months I just lived this sort of quiet, solitary life. I went and, taught my classes at school, and I'd come home and just read or just wander around, and it was just such a great feeling, that sort of sense of escaping from yourself for a little while. And
society doesn't have a lot of claims on you when you come here as a foreigner, especially initially, right?
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, those first few months were very kind of solitary, and such a wonderful experience. My only obligation was to my job, so as long as my co-workers were happy and my students seemed happy, then, I had the luxury of, in my free time just sort of quietly exploring and going around and, finding my feet and, yeah.
Did the idea of a book club come to you because you had so much time to do this reading?
I'd been in some book clubs back in the Isle of Man. I was in a couple of book clubs, and I really, I like reading books and talking about books, and it was great fun being in a book club. And so I just wanted to do that. I wanted to have a similar experience and just meet people that like talking about books, and so yeah, that was the motivation behind it. But very quickly my sort of motivation, or my goal for the book club kind of grew. I really wanted to try and build a community. I guess wherever you are, you want to try and make a positive contribution to your community, right? So, and I thought the book club could be my little project, my little sort of contribution.
Yeah, because of course it's English language books, I would guess. Is it all foreigners or mostly foreigners?
Well, actually, I have an interpreter. So whenever there's a guest comes, there's an interpreter. So all of the events are, fully bilingual. Most of the events are fully bilingual. So
they are certainly now. But when you started doing author events, that was when you decided it needs to be both languages?
That's right. So from Shindong-hya onwards, whenever there was a guest, I'd try and always have an interpreter. There was one or two occasions where it just wasn't possible. But the majority of events since then have been fully bilingual, yeah. And there's a mixture of people. It's very interesting sometimes who comes to see what events. So sometimes if there's a North Korean speaker or somebody who writes about North Korea, the audience is almost entirely international residents of Seoul. But then if it's
Foreigners are more scared of North Korea than Koreans are.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, a lot of people just aren't interested. You know, I guess they've grown up with it and it's been around for a very long time, but certainly there's lots of people here who are, fascinated, especially, Americans. Obviously there's this long history of American involvement in Korean politics, but you've got there's like several, Russian academics who are sort of fascinated by and write a lot about North Korea, but for the big Korean writers like Shin Kyung-suk, she had a very mixed audience. There's lots of foreigners, lots of Koreans. For Gong Ji-young, massively famous here, massively famous writer. But she's not crossed over to, I think, the English-speaking audience as much yet. So the audience for that one was almost entirely Korean people. But yeah, sometimes it depends. I mean, there's a good mix. I think lots of Korean, people come because they want to practice English and they want to have that sort of cultural exchange, and like lots of students come, but I think lots of Korean people and international residents come just because the quality of the guests. I've been really lucky in getting some really good, interesting guests.
All the books have to do with one of the Koreas, do they?
That's not entirely true. That's not like a rule or anything like that. It's just by sheer, dint of being here. Most, the Korean writers obviously write about, South, what's happening in South Korea, the history of South Korea, and because, Korea's modern history is so dense, there's so much to deal with, and so much a part of that is to do with North Korea. So inevitably, a lot of the writers and a lot of the people who've come, the expat writers as well, they either write about North Korea or they always at least touch on North Korea. But, I've had Lee Chang-rae came, and he writes about the, not all of his books have a Korean element in them, but I think just by being here, most of the guests are, in some way involved with writing about North or South Korea. But that's not to say I'd love, like Joe Nesbo was here in the country last month, and I would have loved to get him to come to the book club. So if there were visiting writers, I'd love to get him. I actually managed to get a message to Malcolm Gladwell, and he said the next time he was here, he'd come, But I'm sure that maybe, and Alan de Botton as well. He comes quite a lot to Seoul.
It's funny, yeah, I've interviewed him, and when I mentioned that, for the first few times it came up to Korean friends, they were really astonished, and I guess he's famous here. Like, I couldn't believe that. I like his books too, but how did it get to be that he was so well known in Korea?
Yeah, I don't know, but he is, some of my students, like, he's their favorite writer. They love him, like, they really love him, and if you go to Kyobo, you'll see, stacks of his books, and so he's wildly popular here, and he comes to service that audience. Like, he comes here quite regularly. I think maybe he even comes once a year. But I got a Facebook message from him or whoever the person is who controls his Facebook page, and so I mean I'd love to get someone like that. It'd be fantastic. So hopefully if some of these big international writers come, that'd be great too.
There is kind of a novelty factor. Like if a writer who's never been to Korea comes through Korea, of course they're going to want to do the Korean book club because it's just like kind of they get a kick out of it, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd love that to happen, but sometimes when writers come, like Douglas Kennedy is very popular here. One of his books was one of the best-selling, fiction titles in Korea last year. A book called The Big Picture. But he came here, but he was here for a week, and I met him, I got to interview him, and I talked to him about the book club. But I think when they bring writers over, their schedule's so packed, right? That they line up interviews, and so I think it's very difficult finding a window for them in their schedule or something like that.
I mean, I'm here in Korea for 6 weeks, and this is probably the shortest trip to Korea I'll make. I'll probably live here later myself, but when someone's on a book tour, if they get 5 days in Korea, that's luxurious, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I just think, when Lee Chang-rae came to the book club, like his people sort of swept him in like a minute before it started, and as soon as it finished, they sort of swept him away to another interview.
Handlers came in.
Yeah, that's right. So I think especially when they're doing promotional things like that, they maybe just don't have the luxury. But I guess, like maybe now that they know, but maybe Douglas Kerry, like when he comes back next year, maybe they'll arrange something like that. And
do you know any Koreans on the British Isles?
No, I don't think I'd met before I came here. I don't think I'd met any Korean people. I really don't think I'd met a Korean person at all.
You never got to any of the Korean restaurants on Tottenham Court Road when you were in London?
Do you know, I wouldn't have recognised it. I would have had no idea. Obviously,
Now you'd go right to it, but those days it would be like, what are those squares they're writing with?
That's right. Yeah. If I went back to London, I'd probably investigate the Korean restaurant just to see what it was like, right?
They're expensive.
Well, really,
You'll be shocked to know.
But no, I've got. You interviewed my friend Charles Montgomery, and whenever he goes abroad, he always tries to find a Korean restaurant now just to see what it's like. And I think, I'd probably. I'm not even sure if Edinburgh has a Korean restaurant. I'd be fascinated to find out if there was a Korean restaurant in Edinburgh.
It must now. I mean, it feels like Korea's got so popular in the outside world. How does it feel like from the position of being in Korea? Does it feel like people now know what you mean more when family members say that you're in Korea to some more distant family member or to friends? They don't have to explain as much now, do they?
Yeah, definitely not. Even in the short time that I've been here, just 4 years, I think awareness is much bigger, and I'm not sure exactly what's happened. I mean, you could point to the so-called, the Korean wave. Whether it does or does not exist, I'll let you address with some other of your guests. But I don't think it's just that. I mean, I certainly know that my nieces and nephews, when the Psy song became big, but I don't think you can downplay the significance of that for just making people aware of Seoul, South Korea, and just the fact that there's millions of people all over the world who are aware of the concept of what Gangnam is, not just as a place, but what it means to, this sort of aspirational idea of Korean culture, that it's the successful, modern, vastly upwardly mobile kind of city and country. So I think that's a big part of it. And even in terms of, I think, it's not, people don't just know North Korea now. So if you spoke to like my dad or something like that, they're, much more aware of the other aspects of international political life that South Korea is involved in, whether it's, investing in Africa or, doing some sort of, international, charity work and things like that. I think people are much more aware of South Korea as an entity not entirely connected to the North Korea issue or problem or however you want to term it.
They probably couldn't say what's in, Gwangju, but they can tell you the basic facts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more people do know, things about South Korea, and certainly the culture, in terms of movies, movies, music, Psy, all that type of thing, yeah.
You mentioned movies. You also, of course, co-host the Seoul Film Society, and Korean movies were the way that I became interested in Korean culture. What have Korean movies given you as far as understanding Korea or getting more of a grip on things here in general?
Oh, well, one of watching the movies has been really another interesting journey to go on. So especially watching the older movies. So you have like a series of directors who've kind of become known or are celebrated as auteurs here now. So you've got like Lee Man-hee and Im Kwon-taek and Kim Ki-young, and these guys have these these amazing bodies of work that you can go and investigate, right? So you can go and see all these great films that they made. And so we watched one of the films we watched recently was The Housemaid, Hanyo, Kim Ki-young film. And just fascinating, this portrayal of, these sort of complex issues involving, modernity happening in South Korea and, the sort of this rapid pace of development and, just fascinating how, like a film like that can sort of engage with those ideas and even upend your expectations to some extent. It's interrogating these ideas of what modernity is and what it meant for South Korea. And there's so many films like that. There's another fantastic film, The Road to Sampo, right? And that's a short story by Sookmyung, and I think that was an Iman He film. I think that was his last film he made in 1975, and just again fascinating. So the book was 1973. The short story was 1973, and again that was about the sort of accelerated modernization and sort of urban development of South Korea, and you have these sort of displaced lower class workers who are sort of walking, traveling the country trying to find some sort of manual labor work. And watching the film, and the film's such a beautiful film. The cinematography is beautiful, the cast are fantastic, and it's such a rich evocation of that idea, which is a key part of modern Korean history. That idea reverberates through so many different aspects of culture now, in literature and other movies, and just that historical moment. It's so interesting to see it, funneled through the short story and the film together.
To see that cultural interpretation.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely, yeah. And that's just something that I really like. Lots of people don't like watching the movie adaptation of a book, and that type of thing. But actually, I quite like interrogating the two things side by side. I like seeing a book and seeing someone else's interpretation, right? So I think that's just interesting.
I get the impression that older Korean films, like North Korea, that's a subject that foreigners are more interested in than Koreans. Is that true?
I think that is true. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think maybe, like a lot of my students just aren't interested in hearing about North Korea, and I guess they're young now that they don't have the family members who are in North Korea, right? Maybe their parents and their grandparents were more intimately connected with that idea, but I think the younger generation that's coming through now, they're not, just speaking from what I know of my students and having spoken to them about this, they're just not as interested or engaged in North Korea or resolving the North Korean issue. Obviously, there's politicians and there's groups that are actively engaged, with different aspects of raising awareness or doing various things in connection with North Korea. But I do think there's, kind of an apathy, certainly among lots of younger Korean people, yeah.
Right, even if their family hometown is in the north, it's always been in the north to them. It's just up there, and they don't know, they've never known it.
That's exactly right, yeah. There's that generation now that are young that they've, for their whole life, North Korea has been a separate entity. And I think as well, people are very conscious of the cost. That reunification would be a very expensive process, and how would it work? And I don't know if it's something I'm necessarily that qualified to talk about, really. But yeah, I think there is kind of an apathy towards that. Like I said, like at the book club or the book club events, if it's a writer who writes specifically about North Korea, then the audience is almost entirely international residents. I just don't think there's as much of a hunger for Seoulites to get out there and see North Korea-related events.
Right. It's already right. It's always been right up there. They don't want to hear any more about it, perhaps. But when you're talking to writers, this is an interviewer to interviewer question, I suppose. How did you learn to interview writers?
Oh, right. I guess I think I made lots of bumbling mistakes when I was doing it. I guess I'm still learning. I don't know if I've learned to do it well yet. The book club events are very informal. I think that's part of their charm. I hope that's part of their charm. The venue's quite small, and you get to have this sort of intimate experience, with a writer. And obviously, I've got lots of people helping me. I've got lots of people who, suggest questions and, give me some advice on things to do. So yeah, I don't think it's something that I've fully achieved. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know if it's ever fully achieved.
Right, yeah. But yeah, no, I guess I just try and have fun with it. I get guest moderators a lot of the time as well. So for instance, like when Gong Ji-young came, I got a professor who translated her most recent book to interview her, and I think that adds to the experience, right? So you have this person who's intimately, has worked intimately with the writer and her work, and so kind of knows it inside out, and I think that adds to the experience for people as well. So
Now, you mentioned despite growing up in the country, being a city person, we're speaking here in the Yangjae subway station. In fact, a suitable place to discuss this, in one of the many coffee shops in subway stations here, which are basically malls, a lot of these subway stations. It's the city life doesn't stop when you get down into the train. Tell me what's been that's a striking thing to me about city life in Seoul. What else has been striking to you that's distinct about city life in Seoul that wasn't the same elsewhere for you?
Oh, I think one of the earliest things that I noticed that I thought was unusual was even when I was living out in the sticks, this sort of smaller, I guess not a very well-known neighborhood, but there's so many shops, right? There's so many shops, and the shops all stay open really late. Okay, so even like clothes shops or whatever type of shops they are, like an optician, everything's still open at 10 o'clock.
Stores.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, and so that really struck me the first few months that I was here, because of course, even back in Edinburgh, like the main shopping street in Edinburgh, Princess Street, everything closes at like 6 o'clock, and the lights are off and nobody's there, right? But here, just walking around my little neighbourhood, you really do get the sense, that sense that people just don't stop, right? They have these like all-night cafes here, and like these study rooms that you can go to all night, and it really does have even more so than I think London when I lived there. There's this. It's really easy to live a 24 hours a day kind of lifestyle here, right?
It's like you sense the societal expectations are different because of that. Like in Korea, in Seoul, they expect everything to be available all the time, and they work with that. In Edinburgh, people know it never takes them by surprise that the shops close at 6. So life is structured differently because of that.
Oh yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's amazing how quickly you adapt to that now. Like, I totally understand that idea that you want things to be available whenever, and you're used to things being available, and yeah, and just the idea that even at 10 o'clock you can nip out to a little study room and spend a couple hours working somewhere, or yeah, absolutely, very, very different. Yeah, Edinburgh. I mean, Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, but it's just not. It's just not like London or Seoul or something like that. It's a totally different sort of experience of living there. Yeah.
Is that where you go back to when you go back home, or where is the place you actually go?
Oh, right. Well, my family, and everybody in my family still lives in the same town where I grew up. I grew up in this town called Auchterarder, which is actually about 1 hour outside of Edinburgh. And it's, when I was a kid, I didn't appreciate it, right? I didn't appreciate it at all. I was desperate to leave. As soon as I turned 18, I moved to London. I wanted the bright lights, big city, and all that stuff. But now when I go back, every time I go back, I'm struck by how incredibly beautiful it is. Wherever you are, you can see the hills, and 10 minutes walking, and you're out in the deep countryside. And so now when I go back, I really appreciate it, and I'm glad that's part of my, my history,
Would there be any way to appreciate it if you had to stay there? I mean, it's the same with Seoul, I guess. If you're here all the time, you forget that it's cool, that things are always open. You just expect it.
Well, I don't know what I'd do back in Auchterarder. If I went back, I'd have to live in Edinburgh, just for a job, for a career. Because Auchterarder is really small. There's just what type of job would I do? Where would I work? So, but I mean, I'd be happy to live in Edinburgh again. Edinburgh's an amazing city, and I'd be happy to live in London again if it wasn't quite so exorbitantly expensive. And even I lived in Galway on the west coast of Ireland for a while, and such a great place to live, like such a fantastic place to live. Just really exciting culturally in terms of music and art, and music, art, cinema. Edinburgh is great for kind of theatre, and you have a festival every year, So I'd be totally open to going back there when I maybe later. But I guess my girlfriend's not too keen on living in Britain, actually. So I think maybe Seoul's home for the time being. Yeah.
Are you ever? Because I ask this because often Koreans will regard themselves as representatives of Korea when abroad. Are you asked to represent Scottish culture in any way by the Koreans?
I don't know if I am, actually. Sometimes people do ask, questions, and it sounds so strange, like, what do Scottish people think of something as if, you are speaking for the entire...
I'll ask them, I guess.
But I don't know what you meant to say to that, like, do Scottish people like spicy food or something like that?
It's always, can they eat spicy food? Can they use chopsticks? Probably.
Yeah, but I don't know if there is. I certainly don't feel like I'm a representative of Scotland. Yeah, I don't think so. Anyway, yeah.
When you're, as they say here in Korea, when they're talking about Korea, it's always 우리나라. It's our country. You don't say that about Scotland. You don't say, well, in our country when you're back home talking to family. You're not talking about our country, Scotland, right?
No, that just doesn't happen. That idea of urinara is actually, that's a really interesting idea, and I think, Korea is still quite a homogenous country, right? I saw I teach this professor class at my university, and one of the professors gave a presentation last week about multiculturalism. And I can't remember the figure. It was something like there's 1 million foreign residents in Korea, I think, or something like that. Don't quote me on that.
Right. It could be. Sounds a little high, but it could be.
Okay. Well,
it's probably true.
Yeah. Well, whatever the figure was, but it didn't seem like a huge amount, really.
No matter what, it's small.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the foreign residents are, other, like from the Philippines or even Myanmar or Vietnam and things like this. Okay, and so, but I still think that urinara idea, it's still because Korea is quite a homogeneous country, right? But yeah, there isn't a comparable concept for, England or Scotland or Ireland, yeah.
Now, how did you start taking it to the radio? Now you can hear Barry's Book Club on EBS. What was the process there which this became sort of mass media thing as well?
Oh, right, I guess, I think, how did that start? So I think the book club sort of grew in popularity, and more people started hearing about the book club and coming to the book club, and so I think it was just it just evolved from that. So actually, the segment that I do for EBS, it's a radio station, it was originally called Karen's Book Club. And Karen went on holiday for a couple of weeks, and the producer asked me to cover her when she was on holiday for a couple of weeks. And that was the first time I'd done any radio stuff, really. I'd been interviewed once or twice, but, it was really good fun, and it was kind of exciting, and I like talking about books, And then anyway, Karen came back, and maybe a year later, I guess she was moving on somewhere, and the producer got back to me again and asked me if I'd take it over, and it became Barry's Book Club, and it's just really good fun. I just choose a couple of books each week, and trying something connected to something that's happening in the news, or just something that's interesting. I try and mix Korean books, international books, and they like hearing me talking about sort of British books, so it's a lot of Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters and all this kind of thing, Charles Dickens. But it's
evergreens.
Yeah, absolutely. Today I recorded a segment talking about Dracula, and just great fun, right? Getting to talk about Dracula on the radio for half an hour. And the radio stuff's really good fun, very interesting, and lots of the people that work in radio here, they're sort of culturally engaged people, right? They're engaged with the the culture and things that are happening, and so it's just good to be part of that and just be part of the cultural conversation,
When you're talking about a book, whether on the radio or to book club members or to yourself, what are the interesting questions to you can ask about a book? The interesting types of questions?
Oh gosh, but there's so many. So on the radio, it's not really academic, So like I did my undergraduate in literature, English literature. But that's not really the forum for, sort of some sort of academic investigation into, whatever it is, the nature of, I don't know, narrative structure or whatever. So really you're talking about with Dracula, why it's still such a resonatingly powerful story, right? Or the sort of the interesting, the social, cultural, historical context, where it came from, and just even little things like the background of Bram Stoker, like he kind of hung out with Oscar Wilde and Arthur Conan Doyle and things like that, So on one level, just the sort of the interesting, cultural factors, the baggage that comes with, these sort of famous texts, And at the book club, I guess it's different. Like when we had Gong Ji Young, and the moderator was her translator from her last book. So the types of questions, really fascinating questions about the nature of translation and the style of translation and what that means for the, like the meaning of the work. They talked about at one point. The narrator, there's a female narrator in one of her most recent books, and the translator mentioned that the feedback that she got when she sent in her draft was that she'd made the voice too mean, too mean, and so she had to sort of temper the meanness of this character, and so it was just interesting, hearing about that type of process, and then other times again, it's asking. Why, like with Shin Kyung-suk, she writes about modern Korean culture. Like, Please Look After Mom is sort of this portrait of modern Seoul, right? And so again, you're sort of dealing with how that book interprets its historical moment. What it's saying about this clash between the countryside and modernity, and I think there are kind of different types of forum. The radio stuff. It's not it's 30 minutes. Talking about a classic book. So it's not like a deep delve into, into a more academic kind of understanding of it. Yeah.
Do you notice any difference in the questions asked by Korean readers and foreign readers?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, there's definitely a difference in how the questions are phrased. Right, okay, sure, often the Korean audience members, and there's lots of regular people who come, but sometimes they'll ask a question, but they're very in a very roundabout way. Okay, so they'll make lots of preamble comments before getting to the meat of their question. So I think that's definitely very different. But I don't know if the nature, I guess maybe some of the Korean audience are. They don't ask questions about, how does this connect to Korean history or Korean culture that the international audience are more interested in. They're more, and maybe a little bit more interested in just the work in and of itself, I guess, yeah.
I do notice that now that you mention it with talking to Koreans. In Korean, the preamble stuff, it all feels like it's normal. Yeah. In English, yeah, it sounds, it's you notice it more. It's sort of like, I'll be talking to it English-speaking Korean, and sometimes they'll say, let's sit down and relax comfortably, and we can talk in the manner of friends. And they'll say, it's not just implicit. Like, they'll actually say it. Like, sure, I guess so. That sounds good. It wouldn't have been something I would have just stated as a preface in English, but it's a fascinating cultural difference. I mean, do you notice other things that are just? What are the cultural differences you appreciate the most here? I'll put it that way.
Oh wow, okay. What are the cultural differences I appreciate the most? I'm not sure exactly what to say. I'm not sure exactly how to answer that.
Or things we can sort of put two sides on this one, and I'll say what you appreciate about Seoul when you're back home in Scotland, what you appreciate about Scotland when you're back here and home in Seoul.
Yeah, well, I think there's one interesting thing, and I don't want to speak negatively about Scotland, okay, and I'm sure there are, darker, elements, about Korean culture as well, but the feeling of being safe, like anywhere in Seoul I've ever been, any time of day or night, I've never felt that, sense of intimidation, right? Like sometimes even if you're in Edinburgh or London, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time of night, sometimes, I've seen, crime in the streets and things like that in Glasgow and all the rest of it,
That movie I've seen set in Glasgow is almost always about the ambient threat of being in Glasgow. Is that real?
It's sad to say. It's sad to say, but that is real. That is definitely something that I felt. Even in Edinburgh, though, and that atmosphere. And I think, in Scotland, drugs are prevalent across Scottish culture and society, right? Recreational drugs, and I think that element is missing from Korean culture, right? And
is Barry Welsh Scottish?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
I'll make that connection. Yeah, of course, a well-known writer about drugs.
Yeah. So Trainspotting is it's amazing that Trainspotting is one of the most well-known cultural exports from Scotland, right? And but that's true, right? I mean, the movie made $75 million. Launched the career of Danny Boyle, Ewan McGregor, several other actors that are now working in American TV, and it's about I suppose in a sense Barry Welsh would argue that it's sort of about the the end result of Margaret Thatcher's sort of policies, right? But it's basically about these young people who were junkies, who were heroin addicts in Scotland, and there's still heroin in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and but I mean it's so even, I don't want to get into it too much, but I think that element isn't part of Korean culture, and so that you mentioned like the ambient fret, sometimes some places you go, Edinburgh. And there is that kind of ambient sort of fret, that sort of unpleasant kind of feeling, yeah.
Right. Has any reader ever wanted you to do train spotting for a book club?
No. Well, I mean, we don't, if Irvin Welsh came to Seoul, yeah, I'd try and get him, absolutely.
Astonishing.
But I mean, actually, I loved Trainspotting. I thought it was an amazing book, and I think he started repeating himself. And I don't read his new books anymore. I think he just sort of started kind of regurgitating the same things. But such a fascinating book. And he was a fascinating person. And at that time, that was during the cool Britannia. That was just after Tony Blair had came in, and there was lots of things going on, like Stella McCartney and Blur and Oasis and all that sort of nonsense,
It's the resonance, I never thought about it, but there's a resonance with the Korean wave. Right now, Cool Britannia and the Korean wave have a lot in common. And there's Koreans, of course, and as you know, who are saying, why are we represented by this K-pop stuff? Why are we represented by these cheesy dramas on television? And I would imagine, specifically in the case of Scotland, it's like, why are we represented by Train Spotting? Was it the same thing?
Well, but I think people were very proud of Train Spotting. It was just, I think that it taps into something in the, I don't know, the Scottish personality, that sort of don't care kind of attitude, that sort of, but yeah, I think people were really proud, and it was I was really excited at the time. I think I was like 16 or 17 when the movie came out, and, everybody was talking about it. It was such a cultural event, and just the fact that it was, and it was based on this book that all my friends at school had read, all these people that just didn't read books, and just the fact that it was, everybody was talking about it, and there was these incredibly iconic posters everywhere, which I don't know if you can remember, but it had most of the cast members in some sort of, very simple, it just had this orange banner, but for some reason there was just something.
That.
Yeah, they're very iconic about them. And these
now it's a
posters
of the era, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so I remember that being a really exciting moment to be a part of. I was really interested in that, and then I think some of the players involved, their careers didn't live up to the potential that people thought they had. Even Danny Boyle kind of stumbled and he made some sort of missteps, and certainly Ewan McGregor. And I have this unreserved man crush for Ewan McGregor, but God, he makes it difficult to love him because he insists on making so many terrible movies.
The ratio isn't what it could be, I suppose.
No, definitely not. So I think it's kind of a shame that some of the people involved in that never, even musically, the big sort of musical, I don't think Britpop produced many great albums or left much of a lasting legacy, really. Yeah.
True, but you mentioned that attitude, emblematized by Train Spotting, the Scottish don't care attitude. That's the opposite of Soul, isn't it? Like here, it's care too much all the time.
Yeah, well, I think. I don't know if it's I don't care necessarily what people think about you. Think about you. I think Scottish people are famous for wanting to have a good time, and in a sense, but also there's complexities in there, right? So I think in some respects, what's the international view of Scottish people? They're kind of miserable, dour sort of people. There's the Alfred Hitchcock adaptation of the John Buchanan novel, The 39 Steps, has this great scene in it where the sort of dapper, dashing, Englishman, he's on the run in Scotland and he meets like a crofter, right? This guy, and it's such a character assassination of like Scottish people. He's this incredibly dour, grumpy, sort of miserable penny pinching guy, and his wife is immediately drawn to and wants to help this sort of the dashing English guy. And but I think that image of the sort of the grumpy, miserable, misanthropic Scotsman does still exist. Okay.
Yes, maybe groundskeeper Willie has displaced part. He's people kind of like him in Scotland, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the opinion of groundskeeper Willie is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if he's
a likable character on the side. I remember if you recall the Ren and Stimpy show, another cartoon, there was a Scotsman named Haggis McHaggis. But I actually like haggis. What's your opinion on haggis?
I'm not a fan. Really? Actually, yeah, not a fan.
It's not very healthy, but...
No, I'm not. I've only eaten it maybe I don't know, once or twice in my entire life, like a Burns night or something like that. But even as I was saying, there's that popular image of Scottish people as kind of miserable and maybe slightly misanthropic. But at the same time, there's a music venue in Glasgow called the Glasgow Barrowlands, and so many bands, international bands, American bands. I think I remember, I don't know, was it someone like Frank Black, the Pixies lead singer, someone like that, saying that it was one of the best venues in the world to play because the Scottish crowd just wanted to go crazy and have a good time, So
they were already primed for that.
That's right. They were ready to go. Yeah. So I think that that bloody-minded kind of attitude, or I don't know how to carry. I feel like I'm doing a great disservice to my country just now.
I think it all sounds good to me. It doesn't make me want to go to Scotland unless I do want to visit Scotland. I haven't.
Yeah.
My Korean speaking partner back in Los Angeles, she's got this fantasy about Scotland from an actor on Grey's Anatomy, but it seems like a well-regarded country, generally speaking. Now.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's lots going on in Scotland just now. I mean, there's this historic vote going to happen in a couple of months, I think at the end of summer, about whether or not Scotland's going to separate.
Does that happen periodically, or?
No, this is
conversation happens periodically. The vote.
The conversation, I guess, has been going on for forever, basically. I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's actually a reality now. So David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, I think it was one of his election promises, that they'd give a referendum on Scotland whether to separate or not, and. Actually, people have been asking me a lot about that here, because that's made the international news here. So people ask me about that a lot.
What do the Scottish think about this?
Yeah, exactly. What do you think should happen? And I don't know. I mean, my dad's obsessed with this sort of stuff, like Scottish and British politics. I mean, he can talk about it for hours. But really, I mean, I could actually vote if I wanted. I can, do that from here. But I've no idea what to say or do. I mean, I'm drawn in two directions, really. I mean, one hand, I think, why separate? What's the problem of staying together? And on the other hand, I think why not? And establish more of an independent identity. But then would there be drawbacks, like financially and it's so interesting. Like even J.K. Rowling donated $1 million to the Stay Together campaign, and she was sort of viciously attacked on the blogosphere for doing this, and even the Pope said that Scotland should stay together, and even Obama chimed in and said that he thought that Scotland and England should stay together. So
I would have a very hard time having an opinion as just some American on whether Scotland. I mean, why? Is Scotland itself divided about it in a sort of 50-50 way?
Well, at the moment, the polls are very close. I think there's like 1 or 2% in it, but actually I think, I mentioned my dad's obsessed with it and he follows it all the time, but the rest of my family have no interest. They don't care at all. My younger sisters and my younger sister and my older sister, and even my mum, I don't think that the 1 or 2% indifference, I don't think the whole 100% adds up to a very significant part of the population necessarily.
Is this like in South Korea where the older people care about reunification and the younger people just don't think about it at all?
Yeah, I think that might be true. I certainly think most more younger Scots don't care about, aren't interested in the issues involved in that. I don't know how interested I am, to be honest with you. I mean, I know it sounds terrible, but I just don't have a strong opinion on it. I mean, I've been reading about it, and I kind of feel like maybe, as someone who doesn't intend to live there again, I don't really have a say in the outcome, really. So.
Hands off.
Yeah.
But you come into contact with a lot of Korean young people because you teach seriously, and do you ever have the occasional student who knows you from the book club stuff, or has heard of you through that, or is it separate worlds?
Oh no, yeah. Lots of my students come to the book club, and I think they really like it, and lots of them listen to the radio stuff as well, and they think that's pretty cool. And so yeah, no, it's great. I tell all my students about it, and some of them can't believe you know, like when Shin Kyung-suk came, like they couldn't believe that Shin Kyung-suk was going to be at this book club, you know, that their teacher organised.
It's like a clashing of two realities that they never thought could collide.
How did that happen? You know, like, what did you do?
Yes.
So lots of my students come, and you know, I've got some international students as well, and they come, and so that's really cool. I love it, you know, when they turn up, and sometimes I like saying hello to my students on the radio.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's great. Like even getting to, you know, say, hey, you can come and meet Shin Kyung-suk this Saturday. You know, it's just a good thing to be able to do. But actually, that's an interesting thing. Someone said to me recently, a translator, you know, who translate lots of Korean fiction, that if I only have access to these people, and like organizations are willing to help me contact these people and book them for the book club because I'm a foreigner. You know, if you were a Korean setting up a book club and trying to do what I do, it would be remarkably difficult. You know, there'd be much more significant expenses involved, and I think, you know, I'm really lucky to have been in that position where, you know, there are organizations, and I've got friends of people in different sort of places that can help me do that. But I do think they're doing it because, you know, technically I'm sort of promoting these things to the international audience. Yeah.
You're a link to the all-important link to the international world for Korea, in a sense.
Well, yeah, I don't know if my book club adds to their sales or anything like that.
Psychologically,
I guess that. Yeah. So I think that's kind of I only heard that last week, actually. Someone said that to me, and I thought that was kind of interesting because I totally believe that's true. Like just now, I'm working on getting. I won't say his name. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm working on getting, you know, like a legendary Korean writer, you know. And I think this person's going to say yes. And I mean, amazing, you know, just the chance to get to meet, you know, people like that in that figure. If I was back in Edinburgh or London or, you know, wherever, Galway, I wouldn't be able to do, you know, I wouldn't be able to do the same thing. It wouldn't be like I'd be able to get, you know, Irvin Welsh and, you know, Zadie Smith or whoever. They're not going to be coming to, like, you know, it's just not going to happen, you know.
The context is so different.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's essentially what's happening here, you know, like Yangjae, Shin Kyung-suk, Gong Ji-young. I mean, Gong Ji-young sold like 10 million books here in South Korea, you know. So, I mean, it's really, really incredible. I mean, I still can't quite believe how it worked out like that, you know.
And finally, you know, you have students who are interested in reading English language literature, obviously, and Koreans are getting better and better at English all the time as well, just the language itself, more willing to use it, more willing to be international. What are your impressions of the sort of growing generation now in Korea? The sort of, I've been referring to them as the international Koreans in many conversations, but people write a lot about this sort of generation gap, but it seems like Korean young people now, because of that internationalism, have a great deal of potential. What do you see in them?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like, I certainly know my students are incredibly ambitious. You know, they want to travel, they want to, you know, experience the world. And, you know, I teach at a women's university, you know, and I think, you know, Korea is quite a patriarchal society, and it's been difficult and still is difficult for women to break into certain roles. Like, I don't think there's any major female CEOs here and things like that. But my students are incredibly ambitious. You know, very eager, very hungry. You know, they want to have these international experiences, and then most of them want to have international experiences and then come back to Korea and build their success in Korea.
Right.
And
they can bring that back to Urinara.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's a very important fact. You know, that they want to go and have these international experiences, experience the world, you know, travel and have fun and learn. But then they want to come back to Korea and, you know, build whatever it is that they're going to do, whatever area they're going to go into. But certainly there's absolutely that sense among, you know, the people that I teach, you know, just this drive for ambition and success, and that the world's their oyster. And, you know, I mean, it's kind of amazing, actually. I mean, they're probably, you know, these are young women in their early 20s who are probably going to go on and change the world and, you know, change Korea and do all sorts of incredible things. So there's this, you know, I think this great role model is, I can't remember her name, the Korean female astronaut, and she's, you know, her mum told her, this is in Daniel Tudor's book, actually, I think this interview, and her mum told her, you know, her mum really pushed her to, you know, get her master's degree and her PhD in engineering, because she didn't have education, you know, she didn't have the chance to go to school. And so I think that idea of these incredibly ambitious, you know, young women is it's amazing, and I see that in my students, and it's definitely a good thing.
Give them shout-outs on the radio, and when they're queens of the world, they can give you a hand up.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I want them to remember me, That's right, yeah.
I've been speaking here underneath Seoul, Korea, in the Yangjae subway station with Barry Welsh. He is a teacher. He is the co-host of the Seoul Film Society. He's the leader of Barry's Book Club on EBS FM, and he's also been the longtime proprietor, operator, host, leader of the 10 Magazine Book Club. Barry, thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chenupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Umberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennedy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manvir, Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.